Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking a figure who effectively just breaks the binary of 20th century music.
He really does.
I mean, usually have your high art composers, the Stravinskys, the Coplands sitting in their ivory towers, and then you have the low art rock stars in the stadiums.
Right. The two are not supposed to meet.
But today's subject didn't just blur that line. He took a blowtorch to it. We're looking at a man who was a self-taught composer writing incredibly complex orchestral scores.
And at the same time, he's this rock icon who famously, and I mean famously, despised the drug culture of the 60s.
Which is already a contradiction. But then, to top it all off, this counterculture hero identified himself, confusingly for a lot of people, as a practical conservative.
It is a paradox that makes your head spin. We're talking, of course, about Frank Zappa.
And the mission today, well, it isn't just to list the albums.
Oh, God, no. If we tried to do a track-by-track breakdown, we'd be here for weeks.
Yeah.
He released 62 albums while he was alive.
62.
And the Zappa Family Trust has released another 70 since he died.
That number is just staggering. It's over 130 albums. That level of productivity, it doesn't even seem human.
It's a prodigious output by any standard. But our goal is to look at how he did it, and maybe more importantly, who he was. We're going to analyze the chemist's son who treated the electric guitar like a section of a symphony orchestra.
And the man who took on the U.S. Senate over censorship.
Exactly. And we need to get into the overarching concept he called the project object.
And that chemist's son title, it's not a metaphor, it's literal. The sources all seem to agree that to understand the music, you have to start with the chemistry sets. We need to go back to Baltimore in 1940.
That's the ground zero. Frank Vincent Zappa was born into an Italian-American household, but the environment was incredibly specific and, frankly, quite alarming by modern standards.
How so?
His father, Francis Vincent Zappa, was a mathematician and a chemist. But he wasn't, working at a local pharmacy. He was working in the defense industry, specifically at the Edgewood Arsenal.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know their military history, was a chemical warfare facility.
That's it. This was the era of mustard gas research. The family lived in student housing at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and the sources highlight this really chilling detail that sets the tone for his entire life.
The gas masks.
Gas masks. Because they lived so close to where the mustard gas was stored, the family kept gas masks in the house, just ready.
That is such a heavy visual for a childhood. I mean, most kids have a baseball bat or bicycle in the corner. The Zappas had gas masks on standby for a potential chemical leak.
It creates an atmosphere of this invisible, looming danger. Yeah. You're living in a domestic space that is constantly under threat for something you can't see, but you know it can kill you. And this probably contributed to the fact that Zappa was a very sickly child.
Right. He had all sorts of health problems.
Severe asthma, constant earaches, chronic sinus problems. And this is where the history of medicine intersects with his biography in a truly disturbing way.
This part of the research just stopped me in my tracks, the treatment for his sinusitis.
It sounds like science fiction horror today. A doctor decided to treat young Frank's sinusitis by inserting pellets of radium directly into his nostrils.
Radium, as in radioactive material, up a child's nose.
To shrink the adenoids, that was the theory. You have to remember, this was the 1940s. The full understanding of the long-term effects of radiation just wasn't public knowledge yet, or at least it wasn't acknowledged in general practice.
So you have this kid who Zappa himself later speculated was probably sick from the mustard gas in the environment.
Right. And then the cure provided by the medical establishment is to put a radioactive substance inside his head.
That has to leave a mark. I don't just mean physically, but psychologically.
Or absolutely. It teaches you a very specific lesson very early in life. Authority figures, doctors, the government, you name it, might be doing something completely insane.
It breeds this deep-seated skepticism.
A profound skepticism. He learned that the people in charge might actually be hurting you while claiming to help you. That's a theme that runs through his entire body of work.
And the chemistry wasn't just medical or environmental. It was recreational, in a way. The story about the mercury.
Yes. His father would bring home lab equipment from the arsenal. One day, he brought home a flask of liquid mercury. And Zappa recalls playing with it on his bedroom floor. He'd take a hammer and just smash the mercury to watch it splash into these tiny little droplets.
Which we now know is incredibly toxic. Breathing those fumes is bad news.
Highly toxic. But just think about the metaphor there for a second. You have a child playing with a substance that is fluid, it's dangerous, it's heavy, and it breaks apart into smaller, perfect versions of itself when you hit it.
And when you fast forward to his music,
That is exactly what he does with sound. He smashes it apart, scatters it, and reassembles it into new forms. He treats sound waves like a physical material to be sculpted.
it makes so much sense because his lyrics later in his career are just obsessed with germs, with disease, with the military-industrial complex. This wasn't some abstract political posture for him. He literally grew up inside it.
He lived it. He was in the shadow of the industry. It made him skeptical of official narratives from day one. Now, usually when you have a story about a musical genius, you hear about them, playing piano at age 3 or writing concertos by age 5. That was not Zappa.
No, not a child prodigy in that classical sense. He didn't have any formal training.
He was interested in the sounds. He started out as a drummer. He liked the percussive nature of things. But the big turning point, and this is such a quintessential Zappa moment, came from a magazine article.
Not from a teacher or a mentor, a magazine.
He was reading Look magazine, an article about Sam Goody's record store chain. And the article was basically bragging about the store's ability to sell obscure, difficult music.
The subtext was, we're so good we can even sell this garbage.
Exactly. And the prime example of this garbage was an album by the composer Edgard Varese, specifically a piece called Ionization. The article described it as, and I'm quoting here, a weird jumble of drums and other unpleasant sounds.
For 99% of the population, unpleasant sounds is a warning label. For Frank Zappa, it was an invitation.
It was a sales pitch. He had to hear it. He was compelled. He hunted for that record for a whole year. When he finally found a copy, he didn't even have enough money for it.
But the cover photo sealed the deal for him.
It did. He saw the picture of Varese, who looked like a mad scientist. Wild hair, this intense stare. It appealed to the chemist's son in him. He managed to convince the salesman to give him a discount, and he took the record home.
And that record, Ionization, it basically became his Bible.
He played it until the grooves wore out. He would make his parents listen to it. But here is the absolute key to understanding Zappa's whole project-object idea. At the exact same time, he's absorbing this avant-garde, dissonant, modern classical music.
He's also listening to Top 40 radio.
He's listening to R&B. He loves doo-wop. He's obsessed with the Jules and Johnny Guitar Watson.
So in his developing musical brain, Igor Stravinsky and 1950s doo-wop are sitting at the same table.
They were on completely equal footing. He never saw the distinction between high art and low art. It was all just good sound to him. That fusion is the blueprint for everything that follows. He would spend the rest of his life trying to smash those two worlds together, creating this universe where a complex orchestral passage could just slam cut into a greasy doo-wop chorus.
Okay, so let's move forward a bit. The family settles in California, partly for his health. He graduates high school, just barely, and he tries college.
For about a semester, he dropped out of Chaffey College. He despised formal education.
Why so much?
He saw the school system as a mechanism for creating compliant workers, not independent thinkers. He famously, years later, took his own children out of school when they turned 15 because he felt the system was just about indoctrination, not education.
So after dropping out, he gets into the recording world. He takes over a small studio in Cucamonga, PAL Recording Studio, and he renames it.
He renames it Studio Z.
And this is where the mad scientist really starts to experiment. But the locals, they didn't really see a scientist, they just saw a weirdo.
Cucamonga in the early 60s was not exactly a haven for the counterculture. It was conservative. It was suburban. And here's Zappa living in the studio, working 12-hour days, splicing tape, making these bizarre noises. He had long hair. The local press even ran this little hit piece on him, calling him the movie king of Cucamonga, implying something seedy was going on.
Which got the police interested.
They got suspicious. They thought he was making pornographic films.
This leads to the sting operation. And this whole story, it sounds like a bad movie plot.
It's classic entrapment, really. An undercover officer from the Vice Squad approaches Zappa. He offers him $100, which was a decent amount of money for a broke musician in 1965, to produce a suggestive audio tape for a bachelor party.
And Zappa, needing the cash, he agrees to make a fake tape.
Right, this is the key. He wasn't a pornographer. He and a female friend go into the recording booth. They bounce on a squeaky bed. They make some fake moaning sounds. They laugh. It wasn't explicit at all. It was a joke.
But the police didn't see it that way.
The second he handed over the tape, the police raided the entire studio.
You just stripped the place.
They took everything. 80 hours of his recorded music, most of which was never, ever returned. He was charged with conspiracy to commit pornography, a felony charge.
For a joke tape? That seems incredibly disproportionate.
It was. The charge was eventually reduced to a misdemeanor, but he still had to serve 10 days in jail. And those 10 days were absolutely transformative.
You can imagine him sitting in that cell.
Just think about it. He's lost his studio, he's lost his recordings, his livelihood, all because he didn't fit in with the local culture. He saw the inside of the justice system. He saw how authority could be manipulated and abused to crush someone just because they were different. It solidified this permanent, burning, anti-authoritarian stance. He never trusted the police or the government again.
So he gets out of jail, his studio's gone, he has to pivot. He joins a band that's already playing, a group called the Soul Giants.
But he doesn't just join them. He essentially hijacks them. He was a natural leader or a dictator, depending on which band member you ask.
He immediately takes over.
He convinces them to stop playing cover songs and to start playing his original music, which was way weirder than what they were used to. And they renamed themselves the Mothers.
Which was, at the time, slang.
It was. In the jazz and R&B world, being a mother was a high compliment. It meant you were a really skilled musician, a bad mother.
But the record labels didn't see it that way.
No. The label, Verve, knew that mother was also short for a very specific profanity.
Yeah.
They absolutely refused to sign a band with that name. So Zappa, keeping the subversive edge but bowing to the commercial pressure, changed it to the Mothers of Invention.
And in 1966, they dropped their first album, Freak Out.
Which is just a landmark album. It was only the second rock double album ever released.
Right after Dylan's Blonde on Blonde.
Just after it.
Yeah.
And musically, it was that exact chemical mixture we were talking about earlier. You had these sweet 50s-style doo-wop harmonies sitting right next to experimental sound collages and screaming and dissonance.
But the lyrics are what I find so interesting. He looked like a hippie, the long hair, the weird clothes. But he was not singing, "All you need is love."
Oh, far from it. Freak Out was pure satire. He was satirizing American consumer culture for sure, but he was also satirizing the freak scene itself. He saw the counterculture as just another type of uniform.
He thought if you grow your hair long just because everyone else is doing it, you're still a conformist.
Exactly. He was an equal opportunity offender. He was critiquing the plastic society of the mainstream, but he was also critiquing the plastic rebellion of the hippies.
This seems like a good time to get into the core of his entire body of work, the project object. This isn't just some fancy term he made up, it's how he structured his entire creative life. Can you break down what that actually means for someone listening to his music?
Right. Project object hit his theory of conceptual continuity. Zappa viewed his entire output, every album, every song, every film, every interview, as one single, massive, continuous work.
So it's all connected. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for avant-garde jazz rock.
That is actually a fantastic analogy. It's intricately connected. A character named, say, Susie Cream Cheese might appear on an album in 1966, and then she'll just pop up again in a completely different context on an album in 1975.
And musical phrases do the same thing.
Yes, a musical phrase, what he called an air sculpture, might be played by his rock band on one album and then show up again, reorchestrated for a symphony orchestra on another. For the hardcore fan, listening to Zappa is like solving a puzzle. Everything references something else within this huge, sprawling Zappa universe. It rewards deep attention.
And to achieve this continuity, to build this universe, he developed some recording techniques that were just way ahead of their time. The one that really stands out in the research is xenochrony.
Ugh, xenochrony. This is the mad scientist at his absolute peak. The word comes from the Greek. Xeno meaning strange, and chronos meaning time. Strange time.
How did it actually work in practice? Because we have to remember, this was before computers, before Pro Tools. This is an analog world.
This was him physically cutting magnetic tape with a razor blade. It's painstaking work. Zappa would take a guitar solo he'd recorded live, say, from a concert in London in 1979. He'd isolate that track.
Just the guitar.
Just the guitar. Then he would take a completely separate drum and bass rhythm track, one that was recorded in a studio in maybe 1980, possibly at a totally different tempo and different time signature, and he would physically paste the old solo on top of the new rhythm.
That just sounds like it shouldn't work. If the tempos don't match, it should be a train wreck.
And technically, according to conventional Western music theory, they shouldn't fit. But Zappa had this incredible, uncanny ear for what he called unexpected musical relationships. By forcing these two different time frames together, he created these bizarre syncopations and rhythmic tensions that a human band could never play live.
Because humans would naturally try to sync up with each other.
Exactly. We try to find the one. He wanted the parts to fight each other. It created this floating, polyrhythmic feel that became one of his signature sounds.
So when you're listening to a Zappa solo on an album, you're often hearing a musical collage, a construction, not a single live performance in the traditional sense.
That's it, exactly. You are hearing a construction. And speaking of his solos, we should probably address his guitar playing itself. He's often locked off those top 100 guitarist lists because he wasn't playing blues licks.
He didn't sound like Clapton or Hendrix or any of his contemporaries.
No. He approached a solo like a composer. He used a symphonic approach. He would introduce a melodic theme, then create variations on it, move it around the neck and bring it back, all while improvising. Technically, he used a lot of upstrokes with his pick, which gave the notes a very sharp, almost percussive attack.
It was speech-like.
He wanted the guitar to talk. He was sculpting air. But, this is the biggest, achieving this complex vision required a level of discipline that did not mesh well with the sex, drugs, and rock and roll ethos of the era.
That's the real friction point, isn't it? He was a demanding taskmaster.
He was. John McLaughlin, the jazz fusion legend, he called Zappa a dictator. Zappa knew exactly what he wanted every single instrument to do. He wrote out the drum parts, he wrote out the bass lines. There was very little room for interpretation in the ensemble parts.
And he had absolutely zero tolerance for drugs.
Zero. This is the great Zappa irony. People see the psychedelic album covers, they hear the weird noises, and they assume he was tripping on acid 204/7.
When in
reality, Zappa drank coffee by the gallon and smoked cigarettes constantly. He called tobacco his favorite vegetable. But he would fire band members on the spot for using drugs.
Why was he so hardline about it? It wasn't a moral position, was it?
No, not at all. It was a professionalism issue. He had a great quote. He said, "Drugs do not become a problem until the person who uses the drugs does something that would affect your life." For him, drugs made musicians sloppy. And he couldn't have sloppy musicians when he was trying to get them to execute these incredibly complex polyrhythms.
You can't play in 78 time against a 54 rhythm if you're hallucinating.
You can't. It's impossible. And this tension really comes to a head in his relationship with Captain Beefheart, Don Van Vliet. They were high school friends, but trying to work together was just chaos.
The famous two geniuses on ego trips situation.
That's a perfect description. When they toured together, especially around the Bongo Fury era in the mid-70s, Beefheart was just completely unpredictable. There are these famous stories of Zappa trying to conduct a complex instrumental piece, and Beefheart is just sitting on the side of the stage drawing caricatures of Zappa on a sketch pad.
Or just mumbling into the microphone at the wrong time.
Right. It perfectly sums up the duality of Zappa's life. He surrounded himself with chaos and bizarre characters, but he tried to control it all with absolute mathematical precision.
Now, despite all this complexity, the xenochrony, the dictatorships, the general weirdness, he did manage to have commercial hits, but they almost feel like they happened by accident.
They were usually accidental, or at the very least they were misunderstood. His first top 10 album was Apostrophe in 1974, and that was almost entirely driven by the song Don't Eat the Yellow Snow.
It's a novelty song. It's a suite about an Eskimo named Nenuk fighting a fur trapper.
It's a joke, basically. People bought the album for the funny story. But then they were exposed to the incredibly complex jazz rock instrumental San Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast on the same record. It was a Trojan horse.
And then there's his biggest hit ever, the only one to crack the U.S. Top 40, Valley Girl in 1982.
The irony of Valley Girl is just, it's so thick.
It's painful, almost.
It probably was for him. He recorded it with his daughter, Moon Unit. They were actively mocking the vapid, uptalk slang of teenage girls in the San Fernando Valley. All the gag me with a spoon, grody to the max stuff. They were making fun of that culture.
But the culture did not get the joke.
Not only did they not get it, they adopted it as an anthem. The song popularized the very slang it was satirizing. People started talking like that because of the song.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa accidentally created a cultural trend that he personally despised.
But, and this is an important point, the money from Valley Girl was crucial.
It was. It allowed him to fund his real passion, his true love, orchestral music.
That was always the end goal, wasn't it? To be seen as a serious composer in the classical world.
It was his first love, going all the way back to that Varese record. But the classical world was incredibly snobbish towards a rock guy with long hair. And to be honest, Zappa ended up hating working with orchestras.
Why? You would think that would be his dream environment. Perfect players, reading his docs.
Human error and unions. The famous story is the disaster with the London Symphony Orchestra in 1983. Zappa paid for it himself, out of his own pocket. He was recording some of his most complex pieces, but the union rules required frequent breaks.
And during the breaks.
During the breaks, the trumpet section went down to the pub next door. They came back a little loose. They were playing out of tune. Zappa was furious. He had to make something like 40 razor blade edits just to fix that one section so it was listenable.
He realized that humans were the weak link in his music.
They were. They got tired, they got drunk, they complained, they made mistakes, which drove him right into the arms of the machine.
Enter the Synclavier.
This was his solution to the human problem. The Synclavier was a very early, very expensive digital synthesizer and audio workstation. It looked like a giant computer terminal with a piano keyboard attached. For Zappa, it was the holy grail.
Since it could play anything.
It could play impossible rhythms with 1 millisecond accuracy, and it didn't go to the pub on its break.
It didn't need a break.
It didn't drink, it didn't complain, it didn't ask for a raise, and it never got tired. In the 80s, he shifted his focus heavily towards the Synclavier because it allowed him to be the sole creator. He could finally hear the music exactly as he wrote it in his head without the pollution of human interpretation.
So while he's retreating into this machine musically, he's actually stepping out onto the national stage politically. We touched on his anti-authority streak, but how did he actually identify himself?
He called himself a practical conservative.
And that phrase just confuses people today because he doesn't fit the modern mold of a Republican or a conservative at all.
Not even close. You have to really parse his definition. He favored small government, low taxes, and entrepreneurship. He believed, and this is a direct quote, government exists because individual citizens give it a temporary license to exist.
That sounds very libertarian.
It is. But at the same time, he was a vehement atheist. He despised the religious right. He had this fascinating interpretation of the Garden of Eden story. He saw it not as a fall from grace, but as a parable where God wants to keep people stupid and ignorant, and the serpent is the hero for offering knowledge.
So he was fiscally conservative, but socially he was completely opposed to the whole moral majority movement.
Exactly. And that ideological collision came to a head in 1985 with the PMRC hearings.
The Parents Music Resource Center. This was the group co-founded by Tipper Gore, who was then Al Gore's wife, and Susan Baker, wife of the Treasury Secretary. They wanted to put warning labels on records with explicit lyrics.
The parental advisory sticker that we all know today.
Zappa went to the Senate to testify, and for anyone listening who hasn't seen this footage on YouTube, it is absolutely essential viewing.
It's one of the greatest moments of political theater I've ever seen. You have Frank Zappa wearing this slightly too small suit. His hair is a bit trimmed, but it's still long. And he's sitting before the Senate Commerce Committee. And he just dismantles them intellectually.
He didn't just stand up and say censorship is bad. He had a very specific, very clever argument.
He called their proposal an ill-conceived piece of nonsense. Then he dropped his most famous line from the hearing, comparing their demand for voluntary ratings to treating dandruff by decapitation.
It's so vivid.
But his deeper point was about the money. He argued that the hearings were a distraction. He claimed the real goal of the record industry, who were sort of tacitly supporting this, was to pass a tax on blank cassette tapes. And they were using the PMRC hearings as a way to cozy up to politicians to get it passed.
So he saw it as a financial scam wrapped in a cloak of moral outrage.
That's it. He looked past the culture war, and he saw the transaction. And he didn't just leave it in the Senate, he put it on a record.
He sampled the hearings.
He did. The track is called Porn Wars, on the album Frank Zappa Meets the Mothers of Invention. He took the recorded voices of the senators and the other witnesses, chopped them up, and turned them into a rhythmic, musical composition. He literally made art out of their attempt to censor art. It was the ultimate take that.
And his political reach, strangely enough, went even further than the U.S. This brings us to the Václav Havel connection in Czechoslovakia.
This story is truly remarkable. Václav Havel was a playwright and a dissident in what was then communist Czechoslovakia. During that era, Zappa's music was banned, but it was smuggled into the country on cassette tapes. It became a symbol of freedom for the artistic underground.
And the most famous Czech rock band from that era?
The Plastic People of the Universe. They were pivotal to the Velvet Revolution, and they named themselves after a Zappa lyric from the song Plastic People.
So when the Iron Curtain falls and Havel, the dissident playwright, becomes the president.
One of the first things he does is invite Zappa to Prague in 1990. Zappa arrives, and he's treated like a visiting head of state. There are crowds cheering in the streets, and Havel actually named Zappa Special Ambassador to the West on Trade, culture, and tourism.
Frank Zappa, the diplomat. It's surreal.
For a very brief moment, yes. But the U.S. political establishment still held a grudge. The Secretary of State at the time, James Baker, whose wife co-founded the PMRC, was furious. He reportedly told Havel, "You can do business with the United States or you can do business with Frank Zappa."
They made him choose.
They made him choose. And of course, Havel had to withdraw the official title, though Zappa stayed on as an unofficial cultural attaché for a while. It just shows you how much the U.S. government actually feared Zappa's influence. He wasn't just a weird musician to them, he was a genuine troublemaker.
But tragically, right around this peak of international recognition, the clock really started ticking for him.
Yeah. In 1990, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. The doctors told him it had probably been developing unnoticed for years. He'd had urinary issues for a long time that were ignored or misdiagnosed. By the time they found the cancer, it was inoperable.
How did that diagnosis change his output? Did he slow down?
He stopped touring with a rock band. He simply didn't have the physical stamina anymore. But his creative energy just focused like a laser. He devoted everything he had left to his orchestral and Synclavier works. He was in a race against time to finish the project object.
He just wanted to get the music out of the machine.
He said exactly that. Get the music out of the machine and onto the tape before it was too late.
And this frantic period of work leads to his final masterpiece, The Yellow Shark.
This was his final triumph. In 1992, he collaborated with a German contemporary classical group called the Ensemble Modern. And finally, after all those years of frustration with lazy or incompetent orchestras, he found a group of musicians who respected the music.
They took it seriously.
They rehearsed obsessively. They didn't go to the pub. They learned his most difficult, rhythmically complex pieces and played them with passion and precision.
Was Zappa able to be there for the premiere?
He was very ill by then, in severe pain. But he flew to Germany and attended the premiere in Frankfurt. He was too weak to conduct the whole show, but he got up on the podium to conduct the opening piece, Overture, and one of his Synclavier pieces, G-Spot Tornado.
And the reaction from that classical audience?
It was a 20-minute standing ovation. It was the validation he had been seeking his entire career. The serious music establishment finally bowed to him. In that moment, he wasn't the weirdo rock star anymore. He was the composer. He died just over a year later, in December of 1993. He was only 52.
52 is just incredibly young, and he was buried in an unmarked grave.
That's right. No monument, just the work. He didn't want a shrine.
But the legacy is so weirdly pervasive. We started this by calling him the chemist's son, and it turns out the scientific community really has embraced him as one of their own.
They adored him. I think scientists are often iconoclasts, just like he was. They appreciate the precision, the complexity, and the rebellion in his music. So they started naming their discoveries after him. It's fantastic. There's a spider called Pachygnatha zappa.
Why?
It was named because the dark markings on the spider's abdomen apparently look like Zappa's signature mustache.
That is just perfect.
It doesn't stop there. There's a jellyfish, Phyalella zappi, a fossil snail called Spigori zappania, and maybe the most fitting tribute of all, given his dark sense of humor.
Go on.
There is a gene in the bacterium Proteus mirabilis, which is a bacterium that causes urinary tract infections, named Zappa.
Oh, I would have loved that.
The scientists who discovered it explicitly thanked him in their paper for his inspiration. And there's even an asteroid, 3834 Zappa, Frank. So here's literally orbiting the planet right now.
And the music itself hasn't stopped either.
No. The vault he left behind is seemingly bottomless. The Zappa Family Trust has released more albums posthumously than he did while he was alive. We're still getting new material. Civilization Phase 3, The Lost Episodes, Transfusion, the Project Object continues to expand. We are still discovering connections that he planted decades ago.
So as we wrap this all up, how do we summarize a man like this? Is he the musical scientist who just traded playing with mercury for playing with sound waves?
I think Zappa's own view of himself is the best summary. He never saw himself as a rock star. He famously said, "I'm a composer." He used a rock and roll band because it was the only economically viable way to get his music heard.
Orchestras were too expensive and unreliable.
Right. A rock band would show up, they'd go on the road, and they'd play for a salary. He was using the medium of rock music to smuggle his avant-garde compositions into the mainstream.
He was infiltrating pop culture to dismantle it from the inside.
Precisely.
And that leaves us with, I think, a really provocative thought for today. We live in an era of algorithms. Spotify and TikTok are designed to feed us music that sounds exactly like the thing we just listened to. It's a comfortable loop of familiarity.
It's designed to keep you comfortable. And Zappa was designed to make you uncomfortable.
So the question is, could a project object as complex and demanding as Frank Zappa's even exist today? Could a catalog that requires you to listen to doo-wop and then jazz fusion and then dissonant classical music all at once, could that survive in an algorithm-driven world? Or was Frank Zappa a singular moment in time where the weirdness successfully hacked the system?
In a world of curated playlists, Frank Zappa demands that you listen to the entire library. It's a lot to ask, but the reward is a whole universe of sound.
Something to think about the next time you reach for that skip button. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.